Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to my weekly broadcast that I do for Financial Fridays. Thank you for joining me. Today, our Financial Friday broadcast is going to be covering the topic of negotiation strategies, specifically negotiation strategies when buying a home. But I'm first going to talk just big picture about negotiation strategies, because the truth is we negotiate in everything that we do. And I'd love to hear from you on what other things in life do you negotiate in. So plug into comments. If you're watching live, you can plug into comments right now. I got about a half dozen people watching right now. If you are watching recorded, put in comments and just tell me what kind of things beyond just purchasing a home do you use negotiation skills to negotiate? I'd love to kind of get some feedback on that. While I'm waiting for some ideas to pop up, I'll tell you that negotiation strategies, it really is a strategy. It really requires you to think about what you're trying to accomplish, how to help the other person get what they're accomplishing, and really to strategically negotiate what you're trying to accomplish. So the first question that I thought about was, John, you've been talking all along about the fact that this has shifted into somewhat of a buyer's market, that interest rates are up, and there aren't as many buyers that are looking to buy. And so sellers have the lower hand. The upper hand is in the buyer's hand. So why do you need negotiation strategies in a buyer's market? And the truth is, it's really a buyer's market globally, but individual homes, you might have a difficult time getting an offer accepted because there's still a lot of people looking to buy that home. Here's a quick example. Kathy, thanks for bringing that up. Kathy says buying a new car. Oh man, is there not huge amount of negotiation when you're buying a new car? I think that's a great example of some of the things that I'm going to talk about today and where you can apply them in other parts of your life. I'll tell you that beyond just buying a car, I think about negotiating your salary on a job. Now, nobody on my team is allowed to watch this and then renegotiate their salary with me, okay? I want to make that super clear. You can't use these tactics against me. But the fact is that when you look at negotiating, we're negotiating in everything that we do. We negotiate in our relationships. We negotiate in our employment. We negotiate when we buy things. We negotiate with our children sometimes. Sometimes it feels like a hostage negotiation with your children. Maybe sometimes. Anyway, the fact is we do negotiation in everything that we do. And sometimes people would look at it as compromise. That's another way to look at negotiation, is it is a compromise in the end, but it's about creating win-win situations. And that's where I want to talk about what the definition of win-win versus a zero-sum game. And it's a very challenging definition that a lot of people misunderstand, is they think, John, in order for me to win, the other person has to lose. That's what's called a zero-sum game. And in a zero-sum game, it says, look, I'm buying a house, and the seller wants to sell it for $600,000 and I want to buy it for $550,000. So either I'm going to lose 50 grand and go up, or they're going to lose 50 grand and go down. You can't both win, because everybody has to deal with the same financial numbers, and it's what we call a zero-sum game. In that environment, one person wins and one person loses. And the bad news is most people look at negotiation that way. And they think, look, negotiation is all about me winning. And in order for me to win, I have to make sure they lose. And I completely disagree with that. What I'll tell you is the focus is to create a win-win, but you have to recognize that there's times when that isn't realistic. Most of the time it is, though. You just have to think beyond the surface. You really have to think about yourself and the person you're negotiating with, and understand completely your position and theirs. And so I'm going to share with you a process, and it's called BATNA. And BATNA is a negotiation strategy that essentially means it's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, what the heck do you mean by that, John? It means that you have to have a plan B. Every time you go into a negotiation, you have to have a plan B. So what's your plan B look like? Well, I'm buying a house and I love this house and it's selling for $600,000. And that's what the seller wants. I think it's worth 550, but I'll pay up to 575 because I know there's another house that's not as great that I could buy for 560. So my best alternative to negotiating on the $600,000 home is to buy another house that isn't my favorite, but it's close, and I can buy that house for $560,000. Well, now you know where your negotiation lies. Now you know that, hey, I'm not willing to pay that much, or that's my limit, because that's my next alternative. Might be, hey, I've got another house that I like even more that's at 590. So I'm not going to pay more than $590,000 for this home, even though it's listed for 600. There's a house I like better at 590. So I'll pay up to 580 for this $600,000 home. But my best alternative to negotiate an agreement on that $600,000 home is to go buy the one for 590 that is already listed at that price and I know I can get it. So it's key when you think about strategy and you think about negotiation, understand your BATNA and then understand their BATNA. So you have to look at both sides. You have to say, okay, what is the story with the person I'm negotiating with? What is their position? What are their wants? What are their needs? We're going to dig into this a little bit further in a minute, but let me break down first how BATNA works. So BATNA essentially is a chart. Let's make that a little bit bigger, Anna. So that chart basically says, look, you've got pricing, and we've got the seller starts at the high end of what they want to, the buyer. So the buyer started on the left, and that's the lowest possible price. And the buyer says, hey, here's the range that I'm willing to buy. The seller wants to sell for the highest possible price. And so the seller's desired price is on the far right side. Let me get rid of this thing and you can see it better. Beautiful. So bottom left, you see buyer's desired price. The buyer wants to pay the least amount of money possible. The seller's desired price is in the top right corner because the seller wants to get the highest price they possibly can for their home. And then what you have is across the top, you see on the top left, the seller's worst price. That is the least amount of money the seller's willing to accept. Now, as the buyer, you don't know that number. You know the seller's desired price. You don't know what their worst price is. And then on your side, you know your worst price, which is the most that you are willing to spend. And so when we go to the outer range of the seller's settlement range or the buyer's settlement range, that's basically the beyond the area of negotiation. You're not going to find the two parties coming together. What you're trying to find is the ZOPA. The ZOPA is the zone of potential agreement. That's it. Super simple. I know we kind of think along these lines when we're negotiating, but the truth is it helps to see it visually, but more importantly is it helps to understand the BATNA, where the buyer says, look, at that price, once I hit my highest price, I have a better alternative. If the seller's not willing to go to come down, if there's no ZOPA, if there's no middle ground between the two of us, then so if there's no middle ground between where I want to buy and what the seller's willing to come down to, then I have a better alternative. I have a BATNA. Let me put this into numbers. So let's pretend, again, same scenario, that the buyer's desired price is 550. The seller's desired price is 600. Now, I know that I can find another house for 590, that if I have to spend 590 for this house, I'm not going to buy it. I can buy something else. Matter of fact, because I know that there's another house I can buy for 590 that I like better than this one, I'm not even willing to spend more than 580 for this home. So that's my worst price as a buyer. My worst price is 580. My desired price is 550. What I don't know is what is the seller's worst price? Because the seller, if you're a seller, by the way, you should be thinking about this. What is my best alternative to negotiating a contract, to finding a buyer? And the seller has to say, look, if I can't sell my house for at least 590, I'll rent it out. If I can't sell my house for at least 590, I can't afford to go buy another home. Therefore, I'm going to just stay here and not move. So that's the seller's BATNA. So the seller might have his worst price at 590, but your worst price as a buyer is 580. You're never going to put a deal together. What you're trying to figure out is there a ZOPA? Now, again, your seller's not going to tell you what is their worst price or lowest price they're willing to accept. But you got to look at the psychology and say, there is a lowest price they're willing to accept. And unless there's another buyer willing to offer more, then I've got to kind of play chicken between what I'm trying to offer and the seller's BATNA. Does the seller have a better alternative to negotiating an agreement? So that's basically how BATNA works. The key here is we want to look for the zone of potential agreement. So the ZOPA is really what you're focused on. You're trying to figure out sometimes how to go beyond price, but how to find other things that can bring the buyer and the seller together to find potential agreement. And so I'm going to ask now, anybody who's watching live, feel free to post in the comments now. If you're watching recorded, do it later, and I'll catch them later. But tell me, what are some other things, as you're looking to buy a home, what are some other things that you can negotiate on that will help find the ZOPA, or zone of potential agreement? Because most people simply look at price. They simply say, well, that obviously is what we're negotiating. And if I'm going to get a lower price as the buyer, that means the seller has to give up price on their end. But there's a lot of other things that the seller or buyer can look for. And so give me some ideas and comments on some of the things that you think that we can use as negotiation tactics when you're trying to find the ZOPA, or the zone of potential agreement. While you guys are thinking and putting those comments in there for me, let's look at an example of how all of this works together. So Anna, can you bring up that example for me? This is a real life situation of someone who's simply trying to buy a chair and sell a chair. And so what we've got is the seller saying, I want 125 bucks. And the buyer saying, no, thank you. I'm only willing to pay $75 for it. So we're off by $50 on the sale of this chair. Well, here's the deal. The seller is saying, you know what? If I can't make 90 bucks off of this, I can't recover my cost. I might as well keep the chair. So the seller isn't going to sell if they can't make excuse me, I take that back. The seller says, hold on, I'm reading this backwards. Yeah. So the seller needs to recover their cost. And so the lowest the seller is willing to go is 90 bucks. That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to sell it for less than 90 because that's what I paid for it. So I would keep the chair. The buyer's BATNA is, look, I could buy another chair for $105. So even though I want to buy your chair for 75 and you have it listed for 125, there's another chair out there for 105 that I'd be just as happy with. So the buyer understands their BATNA. The buyer understands, I've got a line in the sand. I don't need to get caught up in the emotion of negotiation. That's one of the biggest pitfalls in negotiation is you get emotionally involved in winning the negotiation. Hear me clearly. Do not get emotionally involved in winning the negotiation if you're trying to successfully negotiate the best possible deal. Now, if you love this home, if you say, you know what, John, this is the only home for me. This is the home in the right neighborhood. It's the only one that's come on the market in the last year, and I've got to have this home. Then the truth is you don't have a lot of negotiation power. You can stand firm and say, I'm willing to walk away at this dollar amount, but you're not. You don't have an alternative. You don't have a best alternative because you're determined to get into that neighborhood. Just understand that that's the position and that's the truth. Facing reality is critical to successfully negotiating your transaction. So don't pretend that you have leverage that you don't. Don't push your weight around like you have leverage if you really don't. So let's go back to this scenario here. What we've got is we've got a ZOPA between $90 and $105 because we've got the seller that's willing to drop as low as 90. They're just not going to tell the buyer that. You've got the buyer that's willing to pay up to $105. And as you're negotiating, you start to figure it out when somebody firmly does not respond to a counteroffer. And that's a strategy that can work out really well. Now, you got to be willing to walk away. I had a buyer who wrote an offer on a home over the weekend. This house had been sitting on the market for a while, and so they wrote a super low offer, and the seller countered. And so the buyer, wanting to get a super low price, wrote an offer really, really low. The seller said, that's super low. I'm not willing to take it. And so the seller countered with a higher price. The buyer responded, countering back at the original offer they wrote. You're basically telling the seller, I'm not willing to go any higher. I will walk away. That's my BATNA. Now, in this case, the buyer didn't need to buy. It was, I would love to buy in that neighborhood, but I have a house just fine. I wasn't really looking to buy, but for that price, man, that's an offer I can't walk away from. So the seller's agent called me on Wednesday and said, hey, John, my seller is considering accepting this lowball offer. Excuse me. They're honestly tired of playing the market. They need to get moved, and they're looking at accepting this offer. And so I want to confirm with you some of the details to make sure you really can perform in the timeline that is necessary. Now, it ended up the next day, another buyer's offer came in and it was at a higher price. So my buyer didn't get the deal, but they're okay with that. That's the point of not being emotionally vested. Now, I'm not telling you that homes are simply dollars to be negotiated. The truth is, it's your future. You have to picture yourself living there. You have to picture yourself working for your family. You're going to show it to your kids. You and your spouse are going to picture sitting out on the back patio watching the sunset together. All of these things happen when you go to look at a home. But just recognize that fact. Recognize that it isn't that simple, like a car negotiation, like Kathy brought up, where, look, if I don't buy this Honda from you, I can go to the Honda dealership in the next city and negotiate with them. If I don't buy the Honda, I can go to the Toyota dealership next door and buy a similar car. The fact is, cars are more of a commodity. Homes aren't. Homes are your lifestyle. Homes are your dreams. Homes are your vision and your memories, and the memories you're going to build in that home. So even though I said these techniques apply across a lot of categories of things you're negotiating for, you really do need to fully understand that when you're negotiating for a home, it's emotional. And it's really hard to take the emotion out of that. And so I just want to make sure that as you think about how do I best negotiate for this, you got to recognize it's also emotional for the seller. The seller, in most cases, is a human being who has lived in this home, who has raised their children in this home, who has watched the sunset in this backyard with their spouse, and now they're moving on and they want to leave it to someone that's going to take care of it the same way. So there's a lot of emotion involved in negotiating to purchase or sell a home. So as a buyer, one of the things you want to recognize is how you ask for concessions matters. If you ask a seller to lower their price, okay. If you ask a seller to pay for your closing costs, okay. But when you ask a seller to lower the price and pay for your closing costs, that hits an emotional nerve for a lot of people. The nerve of that buyer thinking that they can offer $10,000 less on the sale of my home and want me to pay $10,000 for their closing costs. Now, the funny thing is, you're asking for 20 grand. If you would ask them for a $25,000 decrease in the sales price, they'd be less emotional about it because it's adding insult to injury. That's how a lot of emotional sellers feel. My home is special. My home is different than everybody else's home. I deserve to get this price for my home. And if you don't understand the rationale of the person that you are negotiating with and where they're coming from, you're going to lose from the start. So in today's market, we are absolutely still in a buyer's market. Or let me say it's more of a buyer's market than it's been any time in the last few years. I'd want to clarify again, as I said earlier, that depends on the neighborhood. A well-priced home in a good neighborhood, everybody is looking for those, and those are going quickly. They're going for over asking price. There's lots of offers being written, multiple offer situations. I'm seeing it regularly. So recognize this isn't applicable across the board. But when you have a situation you need with a human being as a seller, you've got to start thinking about the other side. You've got to think about what are their wants, what are their needs, and what are their fears. And you need to really put yourself in their shoes. Sometimes a seller simply wants somebody that's going to take care of the home as well as you do. So maybe it's a matter of writing a love letter. Now, some of the realtors that are probably watching right now are saying, oh my gosh, John, love letters, that's a bad idea. In some cases, there's been arguments made that it's illegal in certain states. I don't think it's illegal in California. If it is, somebody please comment and tell me to shut up because I would be wrong. But the fact is, a love letter is basically you writing a letter to the seller talking about how you're going to take great care of their home, how you have fallen in love with their home, and that your favorite feature of the home is that swing in the backyard that faces west so that you can watch the sunset across the lake, and that you're going to be raising your 3 boys running around through that backyard while you're sitting on that swing. So Kathy said, let me finish this and I'll see what Kathy said. So you're going to be running around the backyard, watching your 3 boys in that backyard, and they are going to really love the playhouse that you have there and the lawn that you put in there. And you can just picture your children playing soccer in that backyard. And what you're doing, honestly, is you're tugging on the emotional heartstrings of the seller, because the seller can see themselves in you. Now, Kathy said her brokerage is discouraging them. And I've heard that a fair amount. Discouraged does not mean illegal. So I want to be really, really clear. I'm not encouraging you to do anything illegal, and I'm not encouraging you to do anything inappropriate or immoral or anything else. The issue really is on the side of the seller reading those letters and theoretically could be discriminating against another buyer because of characteristics brought up in the letter. So it creates some potential legal challenges for fair housing when you're disclosing that kind of information. I don't know about you. I'm a fan of finding whatever avenue I can to strengthen my position. So am I too worried about the seller in that case? I hate to say it, but I'm not. I'm not trying to harm them, but I'm absolutely, it's the rare circumstance that something like that goes into a legal battle and somebody's fighting over fair housing because of discrimination, because of something written in a love letter. It's happened. And that's why brokerages are discouraging them. The brokerages that I hear from are mostly discouraging it from the listing agent's side of not showing it to their seller. And I understand completely why. But from the buyer's agent side, I think they're discouraging it just because they don't like the idea. But I think it's a tool that you can consider using. The fact of the matter is, you're looking to win this home, and the seller really, from their side, wants to make sure that their home is handed to somebody that's going to take as good a care of it as they did. Now you got to think about, what are their fears? What are they afraid of? Well, they're afraid of things like, I'm going to get into contract and then it's going to fall apart. I'm afraid that somebody's going to come in here and they're going to negotiate a whole bunch of repairs on the home. They're afraid of a lot of problems coming up through the escrow. I'm afraid of picking the wrong buyer and ending up being in a bad situation. And so a lot of this comes down to communication. What you want to look at, a few things you want to look at, is you want to look at, how long has the home been on the market? Okay, because if a home has been on the market for 6 weeks, that's an opportunity to negotiate compared to a home that's been on the market for 6 days or 6 hours. The seller believes that the price they put on the home is the right price. They believe that they're going to find a buyer at that price or hopefully even higher. And so the seller is not likely to accept a lower price or a concession, a credit towards their closing costs right away. They're going to want to give the market some time. Okay, what we've got right here, Rosemary says, there's a spot in the listing agreement that addresses love letters. I would love to hear more about that, Rosemary. If you could put it into comments, I'd appreciate it. But remember, that's on the listing agreement. And so that's where the agent that is selling the home on behalf or listing the home for sale on the behalf of the seller, that's part of their agreement with the seller of the home. Okay, so it doesn't hurt that what that likely says to me, and Rosemary, hopefully you can fill in some more details for me. What that likely says to me is something in the listing agreement saying, hey, if I get love letters, I'm not going to show them to you. Probably something like that, or maybe it's a disclaimer that I'm not responsible if we get love letters. I'm not sure. But the fact is, a love letter is an opportunity for you to shine and to stand out compared to your competition. But let's go back to, how long has the house been on the market? That's critical. Okay, so if the house has been on the market for 6 weeks, but it just had a price reduction, that's another thing to think about is, okay, well, the seller's motivated. They've lowered their price, but they also just lowered their price. So they want to test the waters at that price. They're hopeful that they're going to find more activity, more people buying or willing to buy at that lower price. So you've got to get into the mental psyche of the person that you're negotiating with to figure out, what are they feeling right now? What are they thinking right now? If the house has been on the market for 6 weeks and there's been no price reductions, dollars to donuts, I bet you that the selling agent, the listing agent, is pushing them to lower their price. And they may be pushing them to lower their price even more than what you want them to lower their price. You may come in as the knight in shining armor. You may come in and say, hey, I'll buy your $600,000 home and I'll pay you $600,000. I just want you to pay me $20,000 in closing cost credit so I can do a temporary rate buy down. And the seller's like, well, you know what? I was about ready to lower my price by 25. I'll take the $600,000 and I'll give you the $20,000, no problem. By the way, there's one more added bonus here. The seller gets to tell their friends they got full price on their home. Stop and think about that for a second. Sellers are emotional humans. They get to tell their friends that they got the full $600,000 for their home. Public record does not say how much the seller gave in credits towards closing costs. Public record simply says this is what the house sold for. So sometimes when you're torn between, man, should I just lower the price of the home or should I get a credit for closing costs? The fact is, a lot of sellers are so hyper focused on winning that, hey, if you give them the full $600,000, they won. Fees, schmees, who cares? I'm paying $20,000. That's no big deal. But you've appealed to their desire to win. There really is no difference in the end whether you lowered the price by 20 grand or got a credit of 20 grand, but the seller feels like they won because they got their price on their home. All right, I got a couple of comments here, so let's see what I've got. So here's what Rosemary said. In the listing agreement, it says the seller has the option to view love letters or to refuse to view love letters. So Kathy said that they were discouraged, and Rosemary is, I'm not sure that Rosemary is agreeing or disagreeing with the concept per se, but absolutely Rosemary is saying, look, in the listing agreement, there is clear verbiage where the seller has a choice to review or not review. So maybe you call the listing agent and say, hey, is the seller reviewing love letters? Maybe you send one blindly, and who knows if this can be reviewed or not, but I think that's a great strategy. And then Cassie says, yeah, and it doesn't help the value of the other homes in the neighborhood. So what Kathy's talking about is what I just said regarding the seller gets their full price. So if you sell the house for $600,000, the seller wins, they got their full price, and the $20,000 credit doesn't show up anywhere in public records, versus if you lower the price to $580,000, the seller feels like they lost, and it hurts the values of other homes in the neighborhood. So you're doing a good deed for everybody by asking for a large closing cost credit. So now I've got the Kathy and Rosemary are agreeing with each other. So Cassie says, yes, she's right. Rosemary says she loves love letters, or she likes love letters, or you love like letters. I'm kidding. So the bottom line is, I love this banter. The bottom line is strategy depends on the circumstances of your person you're negotiating with. I almost said opponent. The truth is they're not the opponent. They're just the other side of the negotiation. And if you can stroke their ego, if you can make them look good, if you can make them feel good, you can get a lot more than if you're aggressive and negative and challenging with them. So let's talk about one more area that we can get a huge opportunity for negotiation. And that's when a home just fell out of escrow. So picture this. You're a seller. You put your house on the market on January 1st. And on January 25th, your home gets an offer from a buyer. And that's a 30-day escrow, and you're supposed to close on February 25th. And here we are on February 17th, and the buyer cancels. It's the last day of their contingency period, and they pull out. You've been planning for the last 3 weeks to move. You've packed up a lot of the stuff in your home. You're already picturing yourself living in your next home. And then the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, and you're devastated. You're so frustrated. You feel like you're never going to get out past this stage of your life and into the next one. And you're fearful you're never going to find another buyer. You're fearful that all of your dreams on the next home that you're going to move into are going to fall apart. And everything is about to come to an end. And you put your house back on the market. If that night you have somebody that comes in and says, hey, I'm willing to offer you the exact same price that the other person was in contract at, you're going to jump on it without even thinking. You've already sold the home in your mind. It's already sold. You've already moved out and into your new home mentally. That person wants so badly for that dream to continue. So you have an opportunity to jump in, especially in a highly competitive neighborhood where maybe not a lot of properties come to market. The moment something falls out of escrow, jump on it immediately. Write an offer immediately with a short close of escrow period. I just posted on Facebook last night about a close of escrow that I started on Tuesday, got a call on a deal falling apart. Now I'm saving the deal for the buyer, but we got a call on Tuesday. I locked the loan on Wednesday, issued disclosures and sent it to processing on Wednesday. They sent it to underwriting on Thursday, yesterday, and underwriting approved it yesterday. The only condition remaining is the appraisal, and that'll be back on Tuesday, and Monday's a holiday. And the closing disclosure is going out today. I'll be able to sign and close this loan a week from today on Friday. That's literally 9 business days from start to finish. So if you're in a situation where you've got a seller who just fell out of escrow and they're still ready to close, and you say, you know what, I can close this in 10 days. I'll write you an offer. Maybe you write it even for less than what they were in contract, but you're giving them what they want. What they want is to complete the dream that they've already been going down the road towards. And that is selling this home and moving into the next one. And if you do that with a short escrow period, you can win more often than not because they've already sold the home. So it's a great opportunity to help you out. So I'm going to wrap up and it'll take 5 minutes or so right now to talk about what concessions you could offer to sweeten the deal. So when you're thinking about how do I find that ZOPA, the zone of potential agreement, you've got to look beyond just price. You've got to look at ways to offer them something that they're saying, man, I think this will make it worthwhile for me to proceed, even if I'm not getting the price that I want. So a couple of things. First of all, a free rent back. Now, if you've got a seller who's already moved out of the home and has moved into another home and it's vacant, a free rent back is of zero value. Do not think of these as one size fits all strategies. You have to look at the situation of the seller. You have to figure out what are they dealing with. And the best way to figure it out is to have your agent call the listing agent. Hey, tell me about the seller. Why are they moving? The more the listing agent is willing to share, the better you'll be able to craft your offer. Now, as a listing agent, I might not be so forthright. I might say, you know what, my seller asked me not to share any of that information. Because the truth is there's nothing you could say. Well, I guess there is some things. I mean, you could share things strategically, like, well, you know, my seller, it's a rent back is really important to my seller. Just so you know, they're going to need some extra time to get moved into their new home. You might say, my seller already has a new house and they've moved into it. Now, be careful, because when you share that information, now you've given the impression that the seller really has to sell because they've already moved. But as the buyer and the buyer's agent, you can learn a lot by just calling a listing agent and asking them, tell me about the home. Tell me about the seller. Why are they selling? Tell me about the home and tell me about why the seller is selling. Now, 2 things you can offer. You can offer a short escrow. I just talked about a 9-day start to finish that I'm putting together, that I'm in the middle of. That's great. But what if the seller isn't moving until March 31st? The seller doesn't want a short escrow. As a matter of fact, the seller wants a long escrow. The seller wants extra time. They don't want to feel rushed. And so sometimes a short escrow backfires. Sometimes it makes it seem like you're trying to rush everything and the seller's going to accept somebody else's offer because you're trying to move things too quickly. Something else you can offer. You can offer a guaranteed close. So that's something that my company will offer on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the circumstances, where we'll say, hey, we will guarantee that you will close within 21 days, or we'll write a check to the seller for $15,000. You have to qualify for that program, but that's a great way to basically stand up against a cash buyer. Because if you've got a buyer that is in competition, if you are a buyer that's in competition with a lot of other cash buyers, well, the seller is often willing, not always, often willing to accept cash at a lower price because they don't have to worry about the appraisal. They don't have to worry about delays in underwriting and the problems that could come with that. But if you could guarantee a close, that would make you more competitive, especially with a big paycheck going to the seller if we didn't deliver on that guarantee. Maybe you can pay title and escrow fees so that you can make it less expensive for them, or you have them pay all the title and escrow fees. So now, hey, no problem. I'm not even asking for a seller credit. Let's pretend on the buyer's side, you're trying to get a better deal. You don't need to ask for a seller credit. You don't need to necessarily ask for as big of a decrease in sales price or a lower price, as much as you just check the box that says seller to pay for all of these fees. It's just a checkbox. If the seller's not paying that much attention, really it's a listing agent. Hey, this is a strong offer. It's at full price and they're not asking for any credits. No, but you got a few $1,000s worth of fees you're paying for that customarily you wouldn't have paid for. So think about title and escrow fees, because it isn't as glaring to the seller when they're covering that compared with when you have a dollar amount sitting there saying $5,000 for closing costs or $20,000 decrease off of the sales price. A couple other things you can do is you can shorten your contingency timeline. So that's your appraisal contingency. I've been getting appraisals back regularly in less than a week. The truth is, on every single offer that any agent writes right now, you should be putting a 10-day appraisal contingency as the longest. Like every appraisal contingency should be cut to 10 days. Every loan contingency should be cut to 10 days. Inspection contingencies are up to you. And on a case-by-case basis, if we're closing in 10 days, then clearly I can get the appraisal and loan contingency within 5 or 6. So there's times where we can shorten those contingencies. Maybe another way to make your seller feel better and to get within that ZOPA is to offer them a bigger earnest money deposit. Maybe they've had multiple buyers that have fallen out of escrow and they feel like, man, if everybody that I was in escrow with had a small deposit, and if I just had somebody with a big deposit, I know they wouldn't walk away from that money. And putting a larger earnest money deposit can help them feel better. And the final thing, and I know I'm going to get some feedback from some of the realtors on the video, is an escalation clause. Now, remember, an escalation clause, let me explain. An escalation clause is really when you are in a highly competitive environment. An escalation clause allows you to say to the seller, I'm offering you $500,000, but I will pay $1,000 more than the best offer up to $530,000. You've essentially tried to find the ZOPA, the zone of potential agreement, by saying, this is what I'm really willing to pay, but I'll pay $1,000 more than anyone else up until my BATNA, up until the $530,000 price. Now, some listing agents are going to counter that back and say, I'm not playing that game, so I want your highest and best. Or they'll counter at $530,000 because they know you're willing to go up to that. You got to decide whether you're willing to spend that or not, because you've kind of shown your hand. But the truth is, you can counter back and say, nope, I'm not going to do that. And so my offer then is the $500,000. It's all about negotiation. You have to understand what is your best alternative to negotiating an agreement on this transaction. Once you understand that, then whether it be using an escalation clause, whether it be negotiating for credits or who's paying for fees, no matter what it is that you're negotiating, you have a firm understanding that says, you know what? I have to make this happen because I don't have a best alternative. Or, there's 10 homes that are for sale in this neighborhood. If I don't make this one work, I can find another one. So gang, that's really everything I wanted to cover today. So I'm going to fill in for a minute here with some quick thoughts, but I want, if you have any questions and you're watching live, to post those questions right now. If you have any feedback or any thoughts on some of the strategies and what you liked or want to hear more information about them, post them into comments. If you're watching recorded, I'll follow up on those comments later. If you're watching live, I'll answer them now. But here's the deal. A negotiation is not a zero-sum game. You have the ability to create a win-win situation, and you have to look beyond price. You've got to look for ways that you can meet the seller with what their needs are, what their wants and fears are, and address those things in your offer. Make sure you find a way to learn as much as you can about the seller and their circumstances, and use some tools. Some are super common and conventional. Others, like love letters and escalation clauses, are not. They're unconventional, and it might cause a little bit of friction between the realtors. But sometimes friction's a good thing. Sometimes conforming to what everybody expects just puts you in the midst of everybody else and you don't stand out at all. So having the ability to stand out above the competition is what you're looking for, and find a way to really drill down to what is the seller needing and how can I make that happen. All right, guys. Well, I'm seeing everybody starting to disappear. So I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my future topics as I roll them out. And I hope everybody has an absolutely amazing weekend. Talk to y'all soon.